Hey guys, welcome back to our JavaScript series. In this video, we're going to talk about blocks in JavaScript. Now, blocks are basically used to group zero or more statements. Each block has its own scope of variables or constants. Now, this would be very clear to you. Like it's a very normal sentence, right? That they just help you to group multiple statements of code. But this is something that you have to actually understand, and that is what tells you the significance of blocks. Okay, so I'm first of all going to show you how you can create a block. We're going to see some important things about that, and then finally we're going to move to this topic over here, right? So let's get started with this video, and let's first of all see how we can create a block. Now, to create a block, you need to use the curly braces. Now, how you can do that, let me show you. So you need to go and say starting curly braces and then the ending curly braces. So that's how you create a block. Okay. Now, inside that block, you can write as many lines of code as you want, and and all those lines would become the part of block. Okay. That is the thing about blocks. Okay. That's how you can create it. So let me give you one example over here. Let me go and say console log hello, and then I said console log hi, and then I said over here that console log hey. Now you can see this is normal code over here. This line prints hi, this line prints hey, and this line prints hello. The only difference is that these two lines are basically in the global scope, but this line is basically inside a block. Now let me go and copy this code and take it to Core JS, and then I can show you that. So when I open that in Core.js, you can see that I get this output over here. Hi, hello, and hey. Now, um, this is what you can see. It's pretty normal and it's doing what it should have done even when this line was not inside a block. Now let's see some more examples over here. We are gradually, by the way, moving towards this only. Okay. And by the way, as I said, there can be zero. That means you can create a block like this, or you can have a block that has multiple lines. So first line, then you have a second line over here. So like that, you can have multiple lines of code inside the block. All that is fine. Now, one more thing over here is that blocks can be nested. What that means is that you can create a block inside a block, just like that. You can see I can create a block inside a block and just do whatever I want to do inside the outer block. Okay, so that is also possible. And that's how basically you can see we can create blocks and we can nest the blocks as well. Now, finally, talking about this thing. This is a very important thing, and for understanding this, I would like to give you some example. So let's take an example of a variable. I'm just going to create a variable a with a value of 4. Okay. Now let's do one thing. Let's go and print the value of a. We see 4 over here, right? Now when I go and create a block over here, and let's say I print the value of a again, but then I just go and say a plus equal to 1, and then I print the value of a again. So you can see over here that a, this variable a had a value of 4, so it got printed over there. And then we print the value of a again inside the block, and then we incremented the value and then printed the value again. All right. Now let's print the value outside the block. Now, if you try to think about it logically, the value should be 5, and that's what you would get, right? All that is good. The only thing over here that you need to understand is that blocks can access the variables outside their scope. What that means, by the way, what I mean by scope. Now, scope is basically the area where block is there. So this is basically the block scope, right? So this is the scope of this block. That's what block scope is called. The block, the scope, the lines inside, the statements inside the scope of the block can access the variables created outside the block, also inside the block. Now, what that means is that I can create a variable, let's say b, and then I can just go and access the value of that b variable over here. So I'm able to access the value of variable inside the block as well as outside the block. But the same thing can't be said about the variables lying inside the block. Now this variable b is inside the block. Basically, this variable is inside the block scope. So if you try to print the value of that over here, you might expect that it would give you the value of 5, but that won't be true. It would give you an error that b is not defined. Now this is a very strange error because b, you can see, is actually defined. So why this is happening? This is happening because you actually try to create a variable inside the block, and so it got a block scope. What that means is that the variable is only visible inside the block and not outside the block, right? So this is basically gonna cause an error, right? Now the same happens with nested blocks as well. If I go and create a nested block, I can go and access the value of a, I can go and access the value of b, and I can create a variable c and if I try to access the value of that, it would work fine. Let me show you. But if I try to print the value of c outside the block, you would again see that error that the c is not defined, right? So the thing is very simple. If you create a variable inside a block, the inner blocks can access that value of that variable or constant. By the way, this applies to constants as well. But the blocks outside that block can't access that variable or constant. Also, the global scope is basically this, right? Without any block. That's called global scope. That can also not access the value of it. Okay, so that's the rule. If you understand it, this is only available inside this block, this is only available inside this block, but this is available inside the whole file, right? And that's basically about blocks. So that's why I was saying that each block has its own scope of variables and constants. That means that each block carries its own variables and constants that won't be accessible outside the block. So let me just go and paste it over here. I hope this is clear. Now the next thing over here that arises from that is shadowing of variables and constants. Now this is a very interesting plus very important concept to understand. See, the thing is, again, you can read the definition over here, but I would like to directly show you an example over here. Now, if I go and say let a equal to 4, and if I try to print the value of that, console log a, that's all fine. Now, if I go and say let a equal to 5, you can see what is happening over here. The thing that is happening over here is that you are getting an error that cannot really declare block scoped variable a, right? Now, why this is happening, I already told you about it in the variables lecture, that you can't have variable with the same name, okay? And so in this case, you were trying to create variables with same name, and that's why this error got occurred. But the statement that I said that time is partially true. You can do something which I'm going to show you right now, which is going to allow you to create the variable of the same name here. Let me show you. So what you can do, you can just go and create a block over here. And then what you can do, you can just create a variable inside that block. So you can see I created the variable inside that block with the same name as the outer variable. Now, one question that arises over here, actually two question arises over here. What would happen if I try to print the value of a inside this block? So let's try to see that. If I try to print the value of a inside this block, you can see I'm getting the value of 5, right? Why this is happening? This is happening because of shadowing. Basically, if in a block, a variable or constant with the same name similar to a variable constant in any outer block is declared, then it would shadow that outer variable for that block and its inner block. What that means is that the value of a would now be dictated by this variable inside this block. Okay, but if I try to print the value of variable over here again, it would give me the value of this. Okay, but if I try to go and create an inner block over here and try to print the value of a again over here, you can see I'm getting the value of this. I hope that's all clear. Now let me do one more thing over here which would make it even more clear. If I go and say a equal to a plus 2, So you can see over here, if I try to print the value of a, I get the value of 7, which makes a lot of sense. Actually, let me just go and say plus equals to, which makes a lot of sense because I just incremented the value of a by 2. So that's all fine. But if I try to print the value of a outside that block, the value is still 4 because, as I said, these variables are completely different variables. Okay, this is just shadowing this variable, but this is not destroying this variable. Okay, this variable is still accessible outside this block, but this variable is not accessible outside this block. And that's why shadowing happens. Shadowing is possible only because of that reason, that block has its own scope of variables and constants. So it has no chance of colliding with this one, right? But the same you can't do it over here, right? If you try to do like let a equal to 6, again you're gonna get an error that cannot redeclare variable, because inside that block you have already declared, uh, you have already shadowed the variable once, and so that variable now exists inside the block. Now you can't create another variable, right? That is not possible. But what you can do is something like this. If you go and say let a equal to 7, you can do that. So now what is happening over here is that this a belongs to this block, and the outer blocks are basically getting the value from this a. Okay, so that's how you can see blocks basically shadow the variables outside itself. Okay, so that's what blocks are. You can see the things about blocks over here. Now I would show you some good examples of blocks when we talk about conditional statements, iterative statements. Basically there we would use blocks. Even function uses this block like syntax, although there's not a block scope, it's called a function scope, which we're going to talk about later on. But basically that's how you can see you can create blocks, and that's how blocks shadow the variables. That's it for this video. If you have any questions, you can drop that down in the comment section below. That's it for this. Bye.